Hello, astrophiles. This is Pat Cosgrove, and I'd like to welcome you to Cosgrove's Cosmos. Today, I'll be sharing with you my most recent imaging project, NGC 7635, the Bubble Nebula, which also includes Messier 52, an open cluster. This project was the result of 8.25 hours of narrowband exposure that was captured on the evenings of October 21st and 22nd. In this segment, I will be discussing the processing strategy used for this particular image, and I'll be discussing the results, which I'm not sure I really love. Let's get started. In my previous video, I described my IC1396A, the elephant's trunk, imaging project. The data for this current project was taken on the same 2 evenings as that one. I came home from a trip out of town just in time for the new moon. Unfortunately, I brought back a nasty cold virus, which became progressively worse over the 2 evenings I captured this data. I could have had 2 additional evenings of data captured. Unfortunately, I was crawled into a ball of simpering snot and feeling so sick that I didn't care about anything, and especially didn't care about astrophotography, so I lost that opportunity. I was able to capture 8.25 hours of narrowband data captured in 5-minute subs, so I did get something I could work with. I shot this image with my Williams Optics 132mm FLT APO refractor, which is using a classic ASI1600MM-Pro camera mounted on an IOptron CEM60 Mount. This is one of my earliest rigs and one of my favorites. I've shot the Bubble Nebula before, using the same rig and doing narrowband imaging, but I was never particularly happy with the results I achieved. While I did get traditional colors from the Hubble palette, I always felt that the image was muddled and that the bubble itself was hidden in a muddy sea of nebulosity that came from the hydrogen alpha channel. So I was never particularly happy with the results I got with that particular target. I had hoped that a new attempt at this with longer integration times and leveraging my growing processing experience might produce a better result. Unfortunately, I ended up not getting the long integration that I wanted. So now the question is, where can I take the data that I have? The processing strategy I used for this image is almost exactly what I did with my previous video on the elephant's trunk. And that shouldn't be a surprise because that too was a narrowband SHO project with 5-minute subs. Same kind of capture, therefore same kind of processing. I started by creating a synthetic luminance image by combining the images that I had and processing that for maximum sharpness and detail. Then the HA, oxygen-3, and sulfur-2 were combined into the first SHO color image, and this was processed to minimize noise and maximize the color position. Starless processing techniques were used to enhance the nebula, and then the image was reassembled along with stars that were extracted from the synthetic luminance image. Next, let's take a look at how this processing progressed. We'll start here with a chart that I've been using for several of my videos now, which shows the overall progression of the image processing strategy from linear processing to nonlinear processing to starless and then to the final combination into the final image. Keep in mind, this is meant to be kind of a very high 50,000-foot view. For a more detailed exploration of the processing, please refer to the posting on my website, which shows a detailed processing walkthrough for the image. We'll begin in the linear domain, and we'll take a look at how we create our synthetic luminance image. We'll begin by taking our master images and doing the early processing, the crop, the dynamic background extraction, and some noise reduction. At that point, we have 3 masters that then can be combined to create a synthetic luminance. This combination will be done by using the image integration tool. The 3 masters are written to a file. They're brought into the tool, which is set up in a very simplified way, doing an averaging method for a combination, and we'll disable rejection since that's not the kind of thing we're trying to deal with here. The image integration tool combines the 3 input images into the synthetic luminance by a weighting scheme it derives, which can be seen here. Interestingly, here you see that the oxygen 3 has the strongest contribution, followed by the sulfur 2, and finally the hydrogen alpha. And here we have the resulting luminance image created. With this view, we can see our 4 master images, and we can see that the new luminance image has a wealth of information that it's inherited from the other 3. Now that we have our luminance image, let's continue on and process it further through the nonlinear domain until we get to its starless form. The first step is to do deconvolution on the luminance image while it's still in the nonlinear domain. To do that, we have to do some preparation. The first step is to create a PFS image, and we're going to use the script PFS image to do that. This is the panel which shows the analysis having been completed. It is now ready to create the PSF image. And here is the resulting PFS image that we'll be using in our deconvolution. The next thing we'll want to prepare is a local deringing support image. This is basically a star map of the brightest stars in the object. And to do that, we're going to use star mask, and I use the settings you can see here to do that. We want to make sure this star map covers the stars in question, so I often will boost the produced star map in order to do that by using the histogram tool with a slight boost as shown here. And here we have the LDSI map that we've produced. Next, we're going to do some iterative testing of parameters for deconvolution to see which gives us the best results. In order to do that, we're going to choose 3 previews on the image that we'll use to test on to make sure the parameters seem to be working in each of these sections. If the results are good, we can then apply that to the entire image. After a round of testing, these are the parameters I ended up using for deconvolution. Please note that I did not use a luminance mask for this particular image. In fact, what I was using is the regularization tables to prevent damage to the background of the image. We don't want to enhance noise here. I'm now zoomed in on the area around the bubble, and this is what it looks like before we apply deconvolution. And now we've applied deconvolution, and you can see there is just a slight jump in sharpness and a reduction in the star sizes. At this point, we're done with our processing in the linear domain, and so we're ready to go nonlinear. Since we're going to be doing starless processing, I'm doing the conversion here by the simple screen transfer function through the histogram tool to do that. And here's the resulting image. At this point, we're ready to go starless, and to do that, I'm using the RC Astro Star Exterminator. I'm doing it in such a way that it generates a star image, and I'm also doing it so that the stars are unscreened. This will allow us to add the stars back in through a screening process, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And here is our starless luminance image. And here is our stars only image. Now we want to start processing our luminance image. First thing I'm going to do is enhance the small level detail of the image using a local histogram equalization with a kernel size of 64 and an amount of about 18. We'll follow that up with another pass with the same tool, only this time we'll change the radius to something larger, 244, and we'll put in an amount of about 0.25, and we'll use a 10-bit histogram. This should go after the larger scale detail and sharpen it a bit. Next, I'm going to create a range mask so I can separate the brighter areas of the nebula from the dimmer background areas. When the mask is applied and used in this way, we can go after the background, which has most of the noise, and we can do some pretty good noise reduction in that particular area. When we invert this same mask, we can now target the brighter areas of the nebula. In this case, we're not interested in doing noise reduction. We're actually going to do some sharpening. Here we've zoomed in a bit, and we can see what the image looked like without noise reduction. Now we've added noise reduction, but because of the mask, we're only really applying it to the background, and we're leaving the bright parts alone. Next, we're going to apply sharpening to the brighter areas. To do that, we're going to use MLT, and here is the MLT panel showing the parameters that are used for this sharpening run. Now we've inverted the mask, and we're about to apply sharpening to the brighter regions of the nebula. And now we've applied sharpening. Again, because of the mask, we're not sharpening the background noise, we're just sharpening the higher level details. At this point, we have the final version of our starless luminance image, and we'll move on to the next processing phase. In this next sequence, we're going to be focusing on the creation of the color image and the processing that leads up to the starless version of that. While we're still in the linear domain, this is the time where we can go in and do some noise reduction on all of the images. And I'm using Noise Exterminator to do that, and I'm using a fairly light touch on that with a value of 0.5. In this sequence, you can see zoomed in versions of the image before and after the noise reduction has been applied. At this point, we're going to go into the nonlinear domain, and to do that, I'm going to use the screen transfer to the histogram tool transform method. Because we'll be going starless, I'm not worried about star bloat. It's also important at this point to start looking at what the images look like. Before we combine them, we may want to adjust them one to another to help get the color balance we wish to achieve. At this point, I've made some changes to the image using the curves tool. Basically, I have adjusted the contrast and the tone scale, trying to make them look a little bit more compatible one with the other. I'm hoping to do this that I'll get a nice color balance when I bring them together. And with that, we create our first color SHO image by using the channel combination tool. In this case, the colors are quite distorted, and this is where we'll need to do some adjustment. The first adjustment we'll make is with the XCNR tool. We'll go after the green bias caused by the hydrogen alpha, and we'll remove most of that in this particular case. The resulting image still has a strong magenta cast. Now, there are a lot of different ways you can deal with that, but recently I've been doing this by inverting the image and using XCNR green to go after the balance that's left. With the image inverted, the magenta areas are now showing us green, which means we can now fix that with the XCNR green tool. We've now applied that, the green is gone, and we're ready to invert the image and go back. With this inversion, we now have an image which is doing much better in terms of its overall color. Next, I'll do a little tone scale and color adjustment using the curves tool. Next, I want to do a little shaping of the colors in here, and I'm going to use the color saturation tool. And mapping how I want the saturations to go across the range of hues, I'm basically trying to boost some of the warm tones. I'm trying to boost some of the blue tones while suppressing those in between. And this is our resulting image. At this point, I think we're ready to go starless. Then we can do some more advanced processing. Using Star Exterminator, I've now created the starless version of the image. And with that, we're done with this section. We're ready to go to the next. At this point, we're ready to focus on the last phase of the operation. We're going to process our color starless image. We're going to create some masks that will help us to do that. And then we'll begin to fold the images together to get our final image. First, I want to create a series of color masks so I can manipulate the individual colors in the image. To do that, I'm going to use the color mask tool. The first one here is for the red color. The next is for green. And note that as I'm doing this, I'm dropping a couple layers to get a softer image as I create the mask. And finally, we have the blue mask. Now we're going to apply those individually to the image and begin to adjust the image for just those sections identified by the mask. First, we apply the green mask, and then using the curves tool, we adjust tone scale and color for those areas that are masked off. I'm now going to do the same thing for the blue mask. And finally, for the red mask. Next, I want to make sure I've really handled the noise in this image. Since most of our sharpness detail is going to come from the luminance image, what we need for the color image is to be nice and smooth. This is a zoomed in version of the image where we're looking at the area around the bubble. And this is before we applied a fairly aggressive noise reduction. And here is after we've applied noise exterminator with a pretty high value. The resulting image looks pretty smooth. The next step is to fold in the starless luminance image into our SHO color image. This is done with the LRGB combination tool. Once this is done, we can see the image has gotten quite a bit darker, much more saturated, but also it has a lot more detail than it did before. We're going to lighten this up a little bit by using the curves tool to adjust things. Now we need to get ready to add our stars back in. This is the stars only image that we extracted from the luminance image. There's a lot of stars here, and they tend to dominate the scene. Obviously, we're going to want to do some star reduction. But one way you can do star reduction when you're doing this kind of starless processing is to simply darken the star image. So we're going to do an adjustment of the tone scale using the curves tool to accomplish that. After this simple adjustment with the curves tool, the star field is less dominant and much more natural. We're now ready to add our stars back in. And the way I'm going to do that is with the pixel math panel. I put in a screening equation, which you can see here, which will blend the stars back in a more natural way. And this is just an approach that handles areas that are light and dark behind the stars in a way that looks a little bit more natural. And here is the first version of our image with the stars added back. At this point, I'm noticing that my background is looking a little greenish, and I think we need to do some adjustments to make things look a little bit more natural. Now I've gone in and adjusted things with the curves tool, and I like what we have here a little bit more, but I'd still like to do some processing here around the bubble region and its surround. And to do that, I'm going to create a game mask to isolate it. Using the game script, I created an elliptical gradient mask that was centered on the gradient. Now by using this and its inverse, I can adjust the image going forward. Using this mask, I've done a little bit more adjusting on the image. I'm not quite done yet here, but I'm realizing I'm not particularly satisfied with the color that I'm getting. A bit more tweaking and I end up with this as my image, but I'm very concerned because this seems to have a very high color and a very high contrast. There's a lot of good things about this image, but it seems like that might go a little too far. So I decided to prepare a second version of the image, which has a slightly lower color position. With this version of the image, I've backed off on the saturation and a little bit on the contrast. So now I have a high color image and I have a mid color image. I used this image to go back with some colleagues, and I even posted it on Twitter to get some feedback of what people liked. Based on that feedback, I made several changes to the image. First, I took the orange tones and kind of rotated them back to the red, which is where I started. I then reduced the contrast and saturation of that area while pretty much maintaining the saturation of the blue area around the bubble. I also darkened the red areas a little bit so that there was a little bit more separation between the background and the brighter bubble area. Then finally, I did another level of star reduction using Bill Blanchand's pixel math tools to do that. And at this point, I'm getting pretty close to my final position. After some final tweaking, this then was my final version of the image. Not completely happy with it because it's a little bit higher in concentration and contrast than I like. But as I experimented with reducing it, I found I didn't like those too much either. So this is where I ended up. Now that we have the final image, I have to say I have mixed feelings about this result. On the plus side, I think the image is dark and dramatic. I think that the image doesn't have the muddiness that my previous images had, and I do think the Bubble Nebula does tend to pop a little bit more. On the other hand, the color saturation and the contrast for the image is very high. Now, I'm a high color guy, but this is actually at a point where I'm a little uncomfortable with it. So why did I leave it there? Because every time I tried to back off on the saturation or on the contrast, I ended up with images that I disliked even more. So I felt kind of trapped in this particular position. So as I say, I have mixed feelings about this image. I'm really not sure why. Maybe it's the target. Maybe I just don't like this particular target. Maybe it's because while I was shooting this and while I was processing it, I was still pretty sick. Or maybe that's colored by output here. Or maybe I'm just becoming a cranky old guy who likes to be contrarian. I'm not sure. But like I say, I have very mixed feelings about the result of this image. Since I have such mixed feelings on this, I'd be interested in hearing from you. What's your take on this final image result? At any rate, I hope you found this video helpful, and I thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel and ring the bell, and that way you won't miss any new content as it comes along. As always, your comments and questions are welcome both here on this channel and on my webpage. Stay tuned for new imaging projects that will be posted in the coming weeks. Signing off, this is Pat Cosgrove from Cosgrove's Cosmos, and I wish you clear skies and great seeing.